Former Eskom head of legal and compliance, Suzanne Daniels, has testified about Gupta associate Salim Essa offering her a hefty bribe in 2017. She told the state capture inquiry that this was in return for protecting former executive Matsila Koko and ensuring that he'd become CEO. Now, the Gupta family was under intense scrutiny at the time, with some of their bank accounts frozen and contracts with Eskom questioned.
At that meeting, he had offered me 800 million rand.
All the more reason why you should want to have nothing to do with him. And you say after that, after he has offered you 800 million rand, corruption, you say he called you over a weekend, you agreed to go and meet him because you are curious?
Well, I found it quite astounding that someone that I had turned down so flatly.
Sorry?
I say I found it quite astounding that someone that I turned down so flatly.
You should not be wanting to talk to that person after that, Ms. Daniels. You should not be wanting to take his calls after he has offered you 800 million rand to do something wrong. You should not be wanting to talk to that person. You should not be taking his calls. If you had his number, you had saved his number, you should block his number, isn't it?
For more on what transpired at the commission, we're joined now by reporter Tumole Mohlaoli. Judge Zondo having none of it, Tumole, by the sound of it. I mean, he fails to understand why Ms. Daniels would meet with Salim in 2015, where Salim outlined all these issues around how executives were suspended. At the time, Salim was not even part of Eskom. That whole idea of how does he know this information, but there's clearly something wrong going on here. She says then they met in the parking lot of some garage where she was offered 800 million, and then now there is this invitation to some townhouse somewhere on a Saturday, and you still accept, and you're saying, oh, it was out of curiosity.
Absolutely, and out of curiosity, just wasn't good enough of an explanation for Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, saying that, for someone in her position, and she repeatedly kept saying that she found this behavior to be odd, and she found it to be strange, and she felt that it was untoward. And yet, at every turn, she would then go and meet up with Salim Essa or accede to some of his demands. And then when we think about what her testimony then led to at that particular meeting, she was then ushered to a townhouse complex here in northern Johannesburg, where there was a meeting underway, where she met the Gupta brothers as well as Duduzane Zuma. And there again, she says that she was made some offers and requested to try and influence the board and to try and see if she could be the inside person to give them a foothold on the board. Let's hear what she had to say.
You 800 million rand. Corruption. You say he called you over a weekend, you agreed to go and meet.
There was a meeting where the minister was called. Minister Lim Brown was called. She in fact was on a telephone conference where the board members were complaining that their bank accounts were being investigated and that they were being declared politically exposed persons, etc. And it was at that point that she came on the call. There was a decision that she would assist where possible, and I'm not quite sure how that meeting ended, but subsequent to that meeting that very day, one of the board directors called me and said to me that she was extremely angry because her accounts, I think it was Nedbank who was threatening to freeze her accounts. And she said to me that if these people think that I'm going down alone, they have another thing coming. This board is owned. Everybody knows that this board is a Gupta board. And I will make sure that everybody knows.
Sure, Ms. Daniels there testifying about the extent of the Gupta influence on the board. So at this time, Tumole, this is when as they say, the storm was erupting with the banks closing the Gupta accounts.
Yes.
And there is a she that she was referring to in that clip. That is Minister Lynn Brown, is it not?
No. The she that she's referring to in that particular clip is one of the board members whose accounts had been frozen.
Right.
So Minister Lynn Brown had intervened at this point by calling and trying to, inquire what exactly is going on, because there's been these, board members that have been stepping aside, others have been pushed aside. A lot of going on at Eskom during a time when, of course, the rolling load shedding was problematic. So this was a board member, and this board member effectively then blew the whistle. And this had led to a parliamentary process where investigations were then underway. And this was a key moment, because without this board member having felt hard done by, perhaps some of these revelations would not have been coming out. And
did the Guptas at the time have faith that Minister Lynn Brown could have any influence in the unblocking of their accounts?
If you listen to anything that Suzanne Daniels have been saying, the Gupta brothers and their empire certainly would have felt very strong and very, chin up, if I can use that expression, because of the extent of the network that they had built, not only in Eskom. If you look at the testimony today, it actually mirrors some of the testimony from other SOEs, CEOs and directors who have testified. They have spoken to the same kind of network that these brothers had built, and the same kind of modus operandi, whereby they would then force people out, put people in, and then have their way, so to speak, with the state-owned parastatals.
Very briefly, how active was Duduzane Zuma in this particular meeting with Suzanne Daniels? Because we know in the previous meetings he kind of said, no, I was there, kind of playing a
yes, that has been his line, hasn't it? That he's just happened to be there coincidentally or just observing from the side. But when you listen to her testimony, she certainly didn't make any big announcements or any big revelations about any statements that he made. He seemed to also just have been hovering around. And this has been some of his defense whenever his name has come up, to say that, in fact, he was not really complicit in any decision making. He was just simply there in his capacity as a businessman to observe. But then again, one has to ask what kind of coincidence is it that he seems to be at every one of these critical board meetings with the Gupta brothers whenever there's a problem at a parastate.
Tumole Mohlaoli, thank you tonight for your reporting and that analysis on what's going on at the state capture inquiry led there by Deputy Justice Raymond Zondo.